Welcome to this episode of Preaching the Word, a video series on preaching sponsored by the Dunk Tank and the Berman Ministry Center. My name is Dr. Stephen Reasor, and I'm a preacher and author, and I teach preaching at Berman University in Lacombe, Alberta. In this episode, we transition from exploring the text to developing the sermon and forming its structure. The first step of the sermon structure stage, which is the seventh part of our 12-part sermonic process, is to define how the text speaks to the current preaching context. Back in the second part of the sermon process, we talked about how important it is to immerse ourselves in the life of our church. Our current step shows us why this is so important. We have gone to our text and explored it and listened to it and gained new insights about the claim the text makes on us. But we are not doing this work just for ourselves. We have gone to Scripture on behalf of our congregation. We and our listeners live at a certain place and time, a local context. We must let the text speak to that local context. So what is your current situation? What is your congregation experiencing? What are they facing right now? Who are they, and how can you communicate to them in ways that will translate well? These questions are why we need to have spent significant time with the people we're preaching to. Being intimately involved in the lives of your hearers is the best way to know how to make the transition from text to sermon. The basic question of this move is, what is the text's claim on your congregation? This will be the same claim we discovered in the last step, only now we are applying it specifically to our congregation. In the previous step, I had determined that the claim of Luke 17:1-10 is, faith in Jesus looks like the uncelebrated obedience of servants to their master. Now, I want to make this more specific to my congregation in their context. In what ways does this text speak to their context? Well, perhaps my church has been rocked by scandal involving one of its leaders. The text may speak to them as a reminder to keep our faith centered on Jesus and remember that He alone is our master and not other leaders. Or maybe my congregation has been divided over disagreement regarding a minor point of theology. The text may reclaim the proper ordering of our allegiance and the centrality of Jesus in our theology. What the sermon will say and what it will do will vary depending on the local context. Answering this question will take thoughtful reflection, and you should be confident that you know the text's claim on your congregation before you move on to the last two questions in this stage. Once you've determined this, write it out in a single statement. Like this: when the First Community Church keeps their faith focused on Jesus, it looks like the uncelebrated obedience of servants to their master. Once you've determined the text's claim on your congregation, you're ready to make your first homiletical move, to determine again in one sentence the focus of the sermon. As Tom Long describes it, the focus of the sermon is the thing that the sermon will say. From start to finish, the sermon will have a singular message, and that message flows from the claim of the text on to the congregation. So, if the claim is, when the First Community Church keeps their faith focused on Jesus, it looks like the uncelebrated obedience of servants to their master, then a potential sermon focus statement might be, like servants obeying their master, sincere Christians keep their faith focused on serving Jesus without regard for the praise or ridicule or mistakes of others. This sermon focus brings together the local context and the original claim of the text. There are a wide array of different ways we could focus the sermon, so we want to thoughtfully and prayerfully make that decision now before we go any further, since this focus will inform and constrain everything we do later. The last question for this step is, what is the function of the sermon? The sermon function is the thing that we hope the sermon will do in the lives of the hearers and the life of the church. Again, we want to state this in a single sentence. It is our purpose in preaching the sermon. For my sermon on Luke 17, the sermon function could be, as we recognize that we all make mistakes, the sermon will turn the eyes of the congregation away from imperfect leaders and our imperfect selves, and will reignite a desire to serve and obey Jesus as the sole object of our faith. To sum up, in this step, we apply the claim of the text to our local preaching context, and then from that claim, we clearly state the focus, that means what it's going to say, and the function, that means what it's going to do, of the sermon. What will the sermon say, and what is it that we hope it will do? Your assignment for this step is to, 1, state the claim of the text on your congregation. 2, write out the focus of the sermon. And 3, write out the function of the sermon. This concludes the 7th step of our sermon process. When you've finished your assignment, join me for the next episode of Preaching the Word, where we will shape the sermon to meet its focus and its function.